just like between person to person, I mean, we are 90 to 95% the same, right? I mean, almost across the board in so many ways. And it's usually that 5 to 10% that is the hill that some people are willing to die on. But if you can communicate on that 90 to 95% level, so many of us can really um, mutually benefit and move forward with the world, get that progress.
Hey, everyone. Super excited to have a special guest join us on the podcast today. We have Ian Minnick all the way from Alaska. Oh my gosh. Like the fact that we're talking to somebody from Alaska is super exciting. You know, as you've listened to the podcast, we spent a lot of time talking about community. We talk about education. And I think one of the things that was really fascinating to us about Ian's story and Ian's journey is just the different types of communities that he's been exposed to. He's visited all different parts of Alaska, including rural Alaska, where he takes like a flight and two other puddle jumper flights and then has a 2-hour ATV tour to get to like a town of like 50 people. And we can't wait to jump in and hear more about your story, Ian. So yeah, super excited. Thanks for joining us. And maybe we can jump right in. So yeah, Ian, maybe you can just kind of tell us about how you ended up in Alaska. I think that story in and of itself is super interesting. And then we'll peel back from there and talk about your travels and the different people that you've met in your journeys, and the awesome work that you do. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited to be here. And thanks for having me. And I think that we talked about this briefly before, that it is a crazy story that I came up here from Hawaii. And a lot of people will ask me, like, why would you leave Hawaii to go to Alaska? There's a lot more of us than you might think, too. But I did come up here for the Army. So it wasn't entirely all fun and games for the wonderful fishing that we might have in the summer. But I did originally come up here for the Army, and I went to the university as well up here to study geology. And I mean, Alaska does have very unique and special geology, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the world as well. So that was what brought me up here. But I'm definitely staying for the community, for the life that I have up here, and as well for the adventure. There's a lot of adventure that I've had in my career up here as a geologist, with private companies, with native corporations, with the state as well. Now working with the Department of Transportation, and it's been a real journey. It's been an adventure, and it's been a privilege to do all that work with these communities.
That's awesome. So Ian, we spent a good amount of time talking about purpose, meaning, people finding their own path, and clearly, you've been on a very interesting journey. I think even leaving Hawaii, like you said, and ending up in Alaska, joining the Army, what that journey was like. Talk us through a little bit about what you've learned about yourself, your meaning, your purpose, as you've seen large parts of the world. You've experienced what life is like in the military. Give us some insights into your thought process of staying in Alaska and hanging out there.
Yeah, and there was a saying that we heard often in the Army, and you probably have heard it before, that there's no atheists in foxholes. I think that there's a certain spirit that goes behind that statement, that goes into a deeper part of philosophy, which is really what drew me after Shirag brought up this podcast. I was like really brought in because I love this deeper philosophy and having these kind of conversations that, you know, often you just scratch the surface on your day to day, and you can kind of get into that deep part. But that no atheists in foxholes, I think that the spirit behind that is really when you're put into those sort of situations, not only are you finding maybe a bigger, greater meaning, but you're really finding yourself. And I think that I push myself into those situations. And I think a lot of us push ourselves into those situations, whether it's in a office sort of environment, or in my case, going out to the middle of nowhere and drilling holes in the ground for weeks to months on end. And that is the foxhole that I put myself in to kind of push my own self discovery, or discovery of myself in the world as well. Um, and I wonder if that also resonates with you and with our viewership, or your viewership here, because that's kind of where the purpose is. You can talk about like motivator factors, or you know the different models of like what motivates people, but I think self discovery is one of those big ones, and that's why I push.
That's really interesting. And I've always thought back to like certain inflection points in my life. And like now I think back and like I wonder what drove me to push myself in those situations. So I'm kind of hearing something similar in how you're describing it. It's like we don't know what pushes us in those certain situations, or like you think back and like why did I try that? It made zero sense at the time, but something just drove me, and I think it's that kind of deeper, striving for something meaningful that kind of pushes us, and even subconsciously kind of pushes us in different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like sometimes you might think to yourself, why am I doing something? Right. Like that's that kind of that motivating thing. Right. It's just like, why am I drilling this hole out in the middle of nowhere? It's just like, am I doing it to show that I can? Am I doing it for this community? Is it all of the above? And I think that part of that like self discovery is like, yeah, I do like doing things for communities. I like doing things for, these from to people or to the public or I like doing things also that are just extreme. I am mildly allergic to the sun and I'm mildly allergic to mosquitoes. And Alaska, we like to joke that our state bird is the mosquito because up here they're insane and they can swarm like nowhere else. And I'm out in the middle of actually real nowhere. Like we're outside of a town, about 3 hours of a four-wheeler ride outside of a town of population 50, which is another hour flight to a population 300 town, which is another 4 hour flight to a population of the big city we have here of 300,000 or less than 300,000 people. You might laugh about that one, New York guys, that we have a big city of 300,000, but we're very proud of our, yeah, we're very proud of our city. And so I'm out, in about as close to the middle of nowhere as I can. Mildly allergic to the sun. It's 90 degrees. I'm wearing sweaters to keep the mosquitoes away from me. I'm wearing multiple bug nets because they will bite through the sweaters through your normal clothes. That is kind of an extreme situation to be in. And I'm out there drilling holes in the ground to make sure that when we build this runway, it's going to be effective and is going to stand the test of time for these people in this town. And they're going to be able to do the thing that you're going to be able to get the medicine that last time we talked about the Iditarod, for instance, and like getting things out to these places is intense. And a lot of these communities, especially in the summer, the only way to get there is by plane, only reasonable way. I mean, sometimes there's rivers, but that's the only way to get there. We need to build these runways that will be able to get medicine in, be able to get people out if they need to go see a doctor. So there's a lot that kind of goes into it, and there's a lot of thought, um, and a lot of self discovery that goes into this process and this like uh, drive, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you got to imagine there's, you know, you're mentioning how, you're mindly allergic to these things, yet you're overcoming your like risks that are associated with the work that you're doing for something greater, something bigger. And whether it was intentional or unintentional, you get to spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And maybe you can kind of walk us through what that even self discovery process has been like for you, because it's not like you've been doing this for a few months. I mean, you've been doing this for a few years now, right? And you continue to do it. You haven't run away. You haven't gone back, to what I think many that would be listening to this would consider paradise in Hawaii. So something is keeping you there, right? And really curious to hear about what it is now, what it was when you first started, and what that whole journey of self-discovery has been like during your tenure in Alaska.
Yeah. There's a lot that keeps me where I'm going. I think that's again that overcoming a challenge sort of thing. We like to push that rock up that hill, right? I mean, I think that that's really a sense of progress that I think a lot of us go towards. I think that you've talked a lot on this podcast about the pushing forward, the progress that we all want to see in society, for instance. I mean, a lot of that in ourselves. I want to be able to push I want to push myself to the limit of what I'm capable of here. And so there's that. And again, that community, though. I mean, I'm currently sitting in Anchorage, Alaska, which is native Athabascan Denina land. And typically, before I would give like a speech or a talk, or I talk about something, or if I go and go to a school to give a class, the first thing that we would always do is a land acknowledgement. We do that here. We would acknowledge the Dena'ina people. The Athabascan Dena'ina people are the stewards of the land that I'm currently sitting on, and they've been watching over this land for thousands of years. And I mean, this land is beautiful. We have incredible fishing in the summer. We have mountains. We have snow. It is an extreme privilege to be here and to do the work that I do beyond just self discovery, beyond the immediate community. I think that we're out here on a philosophy podcast. How much of that goes into a metaphysical realm when I'm thinking of doing these things? Do I get into that? Yeah, I think that there is at least some of that. There is a specific beauty that I don't think that I could define that goes into the work and land and experiences that I'm having up here.
I mean, do you feel a do you feel a personal connection to the land when you're up there, even though you're not from Alaska? You talk about acknowledging the land rights of where you are, but like, what personal connection do you feel?
That's a good question, right? I mean, um, I'm from Hawaii. I definitely felt in Hawaii as an outsider, right? I mean, it is beautiful. Have you all been to Hawaii before? No, not yet.
I have not.
On
The
my
the
list, Ian.
volcano was
Yeah.
that
I said it's on my list. I haven't made it
on your
there
list?
yet, but definitely on
The
my list.
the volcano is going nuts right now, which is so we're speaking about it timely. Hawaii is very beautiful as well, but like I go to the beaches and I enjoy my time and I see the volcano. I still didn't feel like that was home. And I go to the lower 48, which is what we call you up here in Alaska. And some states I definitely feel a little more at home than others. Out here in effectively wilds, I do feel fairly at home. I do like it up here. So I do feel like there's a certain connection to the land. And I feel it in other places as well. I don't feel it exclusively here. And I think that that's something to think about, though. I mean, I kind of wonder how connected you both grew up in New York. How connected do you feel to the mountains of concrete in New York City?
It's a really interesting question. I actually ended up having this discussion and debate on a car ride this past weekend where we were debating whether I'm a New Yorker or not. So, like, I was born in New York City. Like, I was born in Queens Hospital, and I lived there for a few years. But when I was very young, when I was about 4 years old, we moved to New Jersey. But
Mhm,
our connection in this part of the world, like in at least in the way that I view my community, is really through sports. It's fascinating how much of our social interactions are based around sports and the sports teams that you're affiliated with. And, I would equate it where we spend way more time talking about our sports affiliations than we do our religious or political affiliations. Uh, Certainly a heck of a lot more than we talk about community and like activities that we've done to help our fellow neighbors or what we want to see happen in the world at a macro level as opposed to just either being upset about our team losing or how much our team sucks or or whatever other sort of grievance we're feeling that day from our side of the political parties that we belong to. So there's, I think, a connection still through sports that we feel a part of a certain city. But what I love the most about being considered a New Yorker is I feel like there's no other place in the world with the diversity of humans that New York City represents. And I don't feel like anywhere else in the world will ever be able to catch up with the level of diversity of New York City. I think other cities will get bigger. I think other cities will evolve based off of the diversity of their given country that they're in. But there's nowhere else in the world where you have interracial populations from across the world.
mhm,
My own story included, with my wife being half Scottish, half Indian, me being Indian, and now my kids are a quarter Scottish and three-quarters Indian. Like, that is going to be hard to find in other parts of the world, and that's only going to get even more mixed and more evolved. And I think that also adds like another dimension of viewpoints and what we consider as a progressive movement of how humans move forward. And I'm going to tie it back to how you experience community, because I imagine communities in Alaska are quite more like you would consider them homogenous compared to what you see in the New York area because of how they've grown up, and maybe even it's just maybe you can just give us some insights into. I mean, I in my mind can't even imagine a town of 50 people, let alone 300, 400 people,
Mhm.
and what that must be like. And how do you look out for each other? Where do you get food? Because, I mean, like, what we go to grocery stores, man. Like they're stocked with food all the time. Anything we want, anything we desire, we can go find it.
Mhm.
We're limited by our imagination of what we want. It's an embarrassment of riches. It's certainly not the case in a town of 50. So anyway, love to hear the other side of what a town of 50 and life is like there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to hear you say that about sports too, because I went from one state, Hawaii, no NFL or the sports, no big sports team, to Alaska, also no big sports team. And it's interesting to see in both states that they kind of pick and choose where you might like. A lot of my family comes from New England, so there's a lot of like Patriots fans in my family. Some of them come from California, so there's a lot of like Chargers fans, and I get to pick whoever I want to be a fan of. So I played Madden on the Nintendo 64 way back in the day, and I won once as Green Bay. Green Day is great too, but I won as Green Bay Packers, and I was like a big fan of them for a while. So it is interesting though
That's
that
awesome. I love it.
yeah, it's crazy that because it is like a community sort of thing. My wife's really big with the Broncos. She loves the Broncos. Her family's from Colorado. She put a big Broncos on her car, and people like, "Hey, Broncos!" It's like the small communities that grow within communities. So it is kind of fun about that with sports. And I do want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
talk
it
about
is.
the
Is sports are kind of a sorry, I just want to jump in. Like
yeah.
sports are kind of a link to our tribal past, right? It's almost uh, like that kind of striving for community. Because when I talk to non-sports fans, it's always like, why do you, especially in this age of free agency, it's like, why the players are constantly changing. Like, why do you? What's the point of liking 18? And I'm like, no, it's not about that. It's about feeling these emotions together as a group, and feeling going through the highs and the lows together, and that's what it's about.
Yeah. There's kind of like a lineage almost. I mean, I can talk about like John Elway, for instance, and like it still kind of like brings back memories. But um, y- I wanted to talk about one more thing that you brought up too regarding that. Before I talk about those towns of 50 people, and it's that um, coming from two states that don't have a sports team, and then kind of relating that kind of how you said to the world that we have like with politics, for instance, today. How many people don't really feel like they belong in one of those two parties, the two teams? And like I'm one of them when it comes to sports, that I don't really belong to any one sports team out there, besides maybe the Boston Bruins, because I got to see them live. It's kind of like it's that same. You've brought up ranked choice voting on this podcast multiple times. Alaska has ranked choice voting. We're one of the few states that have it, and other states have been excluding it from them. And there's also petitions to cut it out of our voting. And I love ranked choice voting. I think that it's absolutely necessary, and it's the way that we need to move forward in getting those non-party, those non-team candidates, the politicians, those people that we really want to see in politics. So it's just interesting that you bring that up with the sports team, and that kind of analogy just goes
Yeah.
so far with how we're doing here. But I wanted to talk about those towns with 50 people, and I think you brought up like um, the supermarket, for instance, and like kind of how diverse or not diverse these towns might be. And it's there are native villages that it's just you go and it's 100% native in this village, and there are others where it's just like that's not the case. Alaska itself, and you could honestly bring on a true historian of Alaskan native history that would be have that have way better insight on all of this than I would. But I mean, Russia has been here for a while. They've been doing trade for a long time. And of course, they come here. Some people stay. So you might see a lot of Russian Orthodox churches out there, a lot of other churches and missionaries all come up here and integrate into native towns or not. It does add a certain level of diversity. I mean, obviously, Hawaii has a lot as well with immigration from like the Philippines and Japan and all kinds of other places. And a lot of people come up from Hawaii to Alaska as well. I mean, we get people from Samoa up here. There's whole neighborhoods in Anchorage where there's a lot of Samoan guys, a lot of Samoan people that they kind of come in like a big extended family. And there's a certain diversity, I think, in our city here and a lot of our towns as well. And when it comes to the being in a town of 50 people and everybody knows each other, they don't not necessarily know everybody in the next town over that might have 300 people. And it is kind of crazy that, you might not know anybody in the next neighborhood over out in, maybe New York that has a ton of people, but you don't even know everyone in your own neighborhood because there's so many. Um, I think that that's something that is a unique situation for sure up in Alaska. And I actually took down a few population numbers just so I can make sure that I remember them here. One of the towns that I was just at, Takatna, that's the one where this last summer I was out there in the middle of nowhere. That's 2 hours outside of Takatna, a population of 52, and about that flight away over to McGrath, about population of 300, and then another 4 hour flight or so to Anchorage with the 300,000. So it is pretty small, but there are towns out there that have a lot more population. Bethel, for instance, has about 6,000 people. No highway to Bethel. You have to fly in or out. So it is like a lot of people out there in this town where you might say is the middle of nowhere, for instance. And there's also towns that are along the highway that you could drive to from our big city that are smaller. Seward, for instance, has about 2,700 people and is drivable. It's about a 2 hour drive from where I am, 3 hour drive. Yeah.
So let's dig in. I mean, I'm curious as to how you're received, how curious they are. I mean, how
Mhm.
protective are they? Are they bearing arms? Are they just like suspicious? Are they grateful? Like, I'm sure that they're all have their unique experiences. Maybe tell us what your average experience has been, but I'm trying to picture like myself showing up at one of these towns and what it would be like. So,
Yeah.
love to hear some of those details.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you just as a fun kind of outlier of one of my favorite experiences where I flew into Dillingham, which is a bigger town, 2,000 people or so. And I spend the night and I have to catch a flight the next day to Twin Hills, very small, um, 50-ish people or so. And when I land, they bring a lot of cargo with them. I'm not just flying solo. There's a lot of cargo for myself, for my work, which in this case was digging holes in the runway for test pits to make sure that the material is good or identifying like how much of this material we can recycle into redeveloping this runway. And Tom, he lives out there, rolls up in a E150 van blasting AC/DC. And he's got like a death metal shirt on. He's got his AC/DC, the kids almost like the school shoes. And he's like blasting music. He comes out, he's got his like long beard, he's got his long hair, and he's got like his big sunglasses on and doesn't say anything at first. And he like just loads up the gear and he's just like, "Oh, you're here." I was like, "You're expecting me? I actually don't know." Like, I'm not sure. Catch a ride over to the village council, meet everybody. Generally well, I'm generally well received. I think that there's a certain benefit to working with the Department of Transportation that we all have a mutual goal in mind of ensuring connectivity, building resilience in the infrastructure. There's a lot that I bring as well with, I'm usually the harbinger of in about a couple years, we're going to rebuild your runway, which usually means people are going to be out here with money, equipment, rebuilding things. So there's usually a pretty good welcoming when I show up. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the case every time. I think that these villages have had a lot of, you know, Project Chariot was out in Alaska. That was almost a very horrible experience. If you're not familiar with it, they were going to nuke a coast to build an artificial bay, way back when.
Wow.
We almost nuked a coast to build an artificial bay, and the environmental damages that were already done. There are still environmental damages out there from drilling test holes. I'm not 100% sure if it's still ongoing or if it's been remediated, but it's recent that there are still problems out there. And I mean, I did a lot of environmental work out in these villages as well on Air Force long range radar stations. Um, they have been often forgotten about. A lot of these villages have, like, we go out there with the military, for instance, drop off drums of oil, bury them, and walk away. And I mean, that oil is going to make it into the river. River is where the fish are. And now we've just poisoned an entire people's life stream. It's extremely damaging and it's a serious problem. And I would 100% expect a much more negative response than I've received going out to some of these towns. I always come with good intentions, and I think that there's a certain benefit to being a smiling 6 foot-ish, 200-pound white man with equipment, as if I'm here to do work and help people, right? Which is what I'm doing. I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case for everyone that goes out to the towns. So I don't want to speak in any blanket statement, right? I've had very good experience, and with how some of these villages have been treated, it's a surprise to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, given what you're describing, I mean, they'd have every reason to distrust, right? And
Mhm.
the fact that you know they are welcoming you, I mean, that's a real testament to kind of human community. And like, I think most people are generally good, and most people generally want to believe other people are good too, right? Regardless of their experiences. So I think that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we did talk briefly about it. It's just like between person to person, I mean, we are 90 to 95% the same, right? I mean, almost across the board in so many ways. And it's usually that 5 to 10% that is the hill that some people are willing to die on. But if you can communicate on that 90 to 95% level, so many of us can really um, mutually benefit and move forward with the world, get that progress.
No question about it. How in in any of those smaller towns, whether it's 50 or 300 or 3,000, talk a little bit about the community dynamic there. I mean, obviously, you'll know each other, but like, as you've heard us talk about on the pod, we feel like in suburbia and even in urban environments, most, I don't know, lower 48 citizens, I feel like have lost their focus on building their own towns and building their own communities and giving back. We've talked about a myriad of reasons, whether it's, your two working families and, nobody has time to look out for their neighbors or look out for each other because everybody's so focused on how do you survive, how do you make your ends meet, and keeping your own lives in order. And we've, despite all the technological advancements, have found ourselves to have less and less free time, mostly because we're not intentional and we don't design the boundaries for how we use our time, which is one of the really interesting things about the that we wanted to talk to you about is like how important is helping your neighbor and
Mhm.
helping your town to have the right, mindset of the town folks that you care for each other? Because I feel like my impression in a town of 50, you don't even think about it. You
Mhm.
just do it because that's just the way life is. Whereas, when you've got 8 million people in a city, you just assume someone else is going to be worried about it. And unless that's the direction that you want to go in, like you don't even think about it. You just assume it exists and you just kind of accept it. So anyway, yeah, I love to kind of understand in those towns what it means from the citizens themselves to have a sense of community.
The root of this question, I think we're getting at, is community building, and it is really important and critical, especially as we're in society today. I mean, this is where a lot of like white Christian nationalism groups are coming out of, is the how they build their communities and these ideals. A lot of them are getting together because of community building. When you're in a village of like 50 people and like they've been there for thousands of years, they have a very tight knit community in these villages and these areas. And I mean, it's so important to our society as a whole to remember some of those root things that allows a group to be in a spot for thousands of years. I mean, the values that they have, I mean, it is all good things, right? Um, and there's a lot that goes into keeping a community together. I mean, there's a lot of respect for elders in these communities. That's something that I think that we've kind of forgotten about. There's a lot of, the things that we all approve of or agree with, the love thy neighbor ideas and the, you know, watching out for each other. People will let me into their homes when it's cold outside. People bring food out to me when I'm digging holes in the runway because it's helping each other out. And I mean, it comes from like the kindness of people's hearts, right? That's what I see as far as the communities when we're out there, and something that I think is honestly lacking in a lot of the lower 48. And I think you kind of alluded to it with the like it's so many people, the 8 million people in a single city compared to, 50. You can manage a group of 50 with 8 million people in one spot. Small communities build themselves, and it can be a danger when you get to be so selective and you get to be so exclusive in your community, right? I mean, that's kind of how dangerous communities can be formed. I kind of wonder what your thoughts on that are as people who live in that 8 million population city compared to me being out here.
Yeah, I mean, it's very the word that comes to my mind is like it would be considered so narcissistic compared to what a small community where it's just like you just see the same people, you have respect for each other, and so kind of who you are, you can't hide from who you are. Everybody knows who you are. There's no like, well, I'll just be this person amongst this three people, and then I'll be this other person amongst these other three people. Like, you don't have a chance to wear different masks, I would imagine, in a smaller community. The same way if you went to a small high school with 100 people, like, how many different groups of friends could you really interact with, kind of do your own self-discovery, versus when you're in a very large diverse population, you get to try on a, many different masks. You could hang, and I'll give you just a simple, right? Like, you could hang with the sports kids, you can hang with the nerds, you can hang with the Dungeons and Dragons kids, you can hang with the theater kids. Like, we have all of our, conventional stereotypes of growing up in America, and we tend to identify with a particular stereotype. And as, I guess, larger populations allow you to have more diversity even within those groups. So
Yeah.
like you definitely get to wear and I think have a larger pool of characteristics and traits that you might be able to gravitate towards. And so and I think that creates other insights for others in your groups. And you have people that are in different groups and they bring insights to the others. And you just kind of have more diversity, really. I mean, that's kind of the simplest way, which is good and bad. And so, when you grow up in communities that have been around for thousands of years, I imagine there's also good and bad, because bad habits, what society would consider bad, may also be propagated because people don't want to talk about it. I know growing up in like the Indian community, and we've recently had the whole Me Too movement in America, that abuse of women, whether it's domestic or sexual, was always brushed under the rug. Like, nobody talked about hard subjects. Nobody thought it was appropriate to out people that treated others inappropriately. Everybody just thought it was too taboo. So you just kind of brushed it under the rug. Like, no, we can't talk about that. Like, we'd be shunned from society. Nobody would talk to us in the village. Bad actors tended to just not really get exposed, or people would just be like, oh, we just don't send our kids over there. And like, people would just kind of gossip and rumor about it as opposed to talking about it out in the open, which I feel like I've I've transformed from that, because growing up, we didn't talk about uncomfortable things. We just brushed everything under the rug. But as I've gained, diversity of thoughts and ways of living life, that's been super interesting to change in the way that we interact and socialize with each other. And so I think, just like in any dynamic, there can be good things and there can be bad things, but it might be harder to effectuate change in smaller communities because there isn't as much diversity of thought. It might be harder to create a following to say, hey guys, why are we doing it this way? Like, is this really the right way for us to be doing things? I mean, if you've been doing something for 1,000 years, who the hell is going to change that? Like, it's a really interesting thought dynamic, and curious on your thoughts on that, Ian.
No, absolutely. I think that the communities up here share some of those same challenges in overcoming those changes. Obviously, we want to value all of those very good values, the things of respecting your elders, the community, the building for each other, but especially when it comes to women, I think that that one is just pervasive through so many societies, and it is definitely an issue. I mean, I think that Alaska has one of the highest rates of sexual assault, rape out of all the other states. Like, I guess a percentage, I think. Don't quote me on that one, but it is a serious issue up here, and it gets approached as, well, it's a cultural, or it's like it's a community, or it's a whatever sort of thing. So it's kind of hard to make those sort of changes. And I think that it's not until you meet somebody who's been affected by something so horrible, it is difficult to push for it. I was on a job site once, and a woman rolled up, and she was older, and I really couldn't understand much of what she was saying, which is just, I have bad hearing as it is. There's planes, it's windy. But as I got on the plane and I flew off, I was kind of thinking, I was just like, she was talking about promos. And I think that she was talking about like effectively being forced into a pornography. And I couldn't actually pick up on it of what was going on. And it's just like, as I left, I'm like, wow, like I need to report this. I can file my report, but I don't know how far that's going to go. I don't know the name of the woman. I just was in and out of this town doing my work. But I think that across the board, the treatment or mistreatment of women in so many communities and society is a serious issue. And I mean, it's the mistreatment of the outsider. It's the mistreatment of immigrants. It's the mistreatment of women. There are always going to be people who see themselves in more power, who want to use that power for bad as opposed to good. And I think that as a community, I think that when we vote people in, we need to be, you know, we are all here. We agree with voting, right? Like we're a democracy, we're a democratic republic as a country. And I think that when we make those decisions and make those very important things, it's something to consider at every single level. Um, and when with these communities, sometimes it's just the eldest is the mayor, right? That in some of them it's not. It's the one with the most business oriented mind. I don't know if it's something that people in the lower 48 often know about, but the villages up here don't actually work in the same way that in the lower 48 a reservation might work. Are you familiar at all with like native corporations? No?
No. Nope.
No.
Educate us.
Yeah, it in the lower 48, and there is some controversy around all of this, but in the lower 48, I know that, the reservations are developed, and I'm not an expert on that either, but, it's a government to government sort of, they have a certain sovereignty, a certain land, and it is held in trust by the federal government, is my understanding of it. Up here, there was, I think it was in the 70s, there was the creation of the native corporations. I believe there's 12 different native corporations, and these areas of land, and there's 200 smaller, the towns and the villages, they got together and they also have their own corporations, and they kind of become bigger. Like, for instance, I worked for the Aliu Corporation, which is both a corporate, the shareholders would be the native people. So the shareholders of this corporation are the native people of this land. They get dividends. They might get work. There are certain contracts that the government puts out that you have a preferential you can get a preferential treatment in getting these contracts if working for a native corporation, for instance. And that's kind of what we have instead of reservations. Out in a town of 50 people, how do you get money? And that's really how it is. There's no store there. The store is also the tribal village council building. And when I go in, they might have like Snickers or a few other small things that you can get. But really, how people out there are getting money is dividends, because they're a shareholder in this corporation that has, they have investments, they have construction companies, they have investing companies, all kinds of other things, and that's kind of how that's the driving force for a lot of these communities, good and bad in those.
Wow. So they get paid on these dividends. So do they like? How do they get food and how do they get jobs? And I mean, is their sole income those dividends from the trusts?
Yeah, there are other things. The DOT, myself, or other people from the DOT, when we roll in, there might be a big federal state contract in redeveloping. So there's a lot of equipment operators out there. And, this is, I think, what brought me to this podcast in the first place, this story, when I was talking to Shirag about this in the Project Management Institute meeting, was I went to the village called Nightmute, rather small. And as part of my work there, there was no lodging for me, so I had to stay in the school. As part of my payment to stay in the school, is I was going to give a talk to the students, all native kids, high school, middle school, old middle school, young high school, and I was there with my supervisor as well. And he was kind of approaching it from like the realistic standpoint. He's just like, from here, out of high school, you all should become equipment operators. Great jobs, great money. They make more than the teachers that are out there teaching them doing this equipment operation stuff. I kind of come in with, bright eyes or wide eyes and just, big dreams. I'm like, come be a geologist like me. And it's maybe a little unrealistic. And but you all know this land so much better. We had a landslide out there from undercutting the ground. That kind of knowledge is something that would be lost or would be known by somebody who knows that land and is a steward of the land. That's something that would be really beneficial. But those are jobs that they do have out there. I mean, there's gold mines that are out in those lands, and they have equipment operators running stuff. They have geologists out there on these gold mines. Some of it's placer, some of it's, getting into the geology stuff here, but some of it's hard rock. There's fisheries, there's whole fishing communities out there. Togiak, not too far from that, Twin Hills town that I mentioned earlier. They have one side of it is where all of the people live. They'll leave and out in their boats and they'll fish, and then they pull into the other side of the bay, and that's where the cannery is. So cannery's far away, smells dead and fishy. Go back home afterwards, but they get around on boat for 90% of their travel, just little trawlers, and then they go out to their fishing boats. It's a whole different world out there, especially in those fishing communities when how they get their money and how they live their life.
So, I have a question. Have you just since we're on the topic of kind of geology, and you talked about kind of like this tribal knowledge, right, that they have of the land. Is that, I imagine it traditionally that was passed down orally from, person to person.
Mhm.
Is there any effort to kind of capture that, or like, you know, I guess officially or unofficially to capture some of that knowledge?
Absolutely, yeah. And so much of it is being lost because that's a really good point, right? Um, and not just the knowledge being lost, but so much of it in general is being lost. There is a lot of work with the university. The university is just constantly the University of Alaska. I worked with some groups there that were trying to interview elders, and that was something that they tried to do is interview elders and capture some of that knowledge. But I mean, another one this one's actually for free on nps.gov is something that if you wanted to ever look into it, it's Atu Boy is a book, and it's actually about some knowledge that would have been lost if not for this. I mean, I think 35 people or so that in World War II were captured by the Japanese and interred in Japanese camps from Alaska. So an entire native community was just picked up on boats, brought off to Japan. They worked. Most of them, I think, at least half or close to half died. And it's from the perspective of a young boy he was young during the time of this capture. He recently passed away, but like that knowledge would have been lost if not captured somewhere along the way. And I mean, he was old when they wrote this book and did this talk. That kind of knowledge can be easily forgotten to time, and it could be not captured. It is a very good point though, and it's something that we do want to learn.
No, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, when you're like going into these towns and you're staying in schools and you're kind of like bartering, right? Like I am like I can't remember ever bartering for any like in a long time. It's like we've become so like currency and monetary, like everything here is, like credit card swipes or whatnot, and maybe
Mhm.
even cash is, maybe once in a while. Um but what are you teaching them? What is the coursework that you talk about, and like how much do you have to plan and set that up ahead of time before you show up? And like, have you ever gone into a town without like planning this out and being like, oh my God, like where am I going to stay? And you just are like,
Mhm.
oh, I'll figure it out. Like, and I don't know, just really curious about how the logistics of your travel even work. Cause I don't think you're going to like, Expedia or like online websites to book travel to like, remote towns.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do not teach as half as much as I want to. That was very rewarding, and I think I think that was like the only time I've ever had that experience of being able to barter knowledge for a place to stay. But I mean, I've bartered a bottle of Crown Royal for a truck, and it was not a dry town. There are dry villages out there, so it is. I was responsible with the bartering. Um, he's a responsible man. I know him personally, so it's all good. But there is a lot of that goes into the bartering. But would you mind repeating your question one more time if you had more to it
Yeah, no, no.
that just like sparked right away?
No, all good. Yeah. I mean, just, how much do you plan logistically
Mm.
for your travels? How much do you wing it? And like just, I don't know, really curious about some of the surprises that you've experienced, and, really getting some insights into just human nature and like what you see in these communities, like, because ignorant or not, Ian, like, I view what you must see as the building blocks that, we've forgotten when we just assume
Mhm.
that society around us just exists. And you'll bring such unique insights into, like, it is a microcosm of what we all experience. Okay, we're comparing and contrasting rural Alaska to New York City life, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think we're seeing that there's a microcosm of everything we experience in the big city with what you experience, but there's still these, like, the 5% that you were talking about, or even ten
Mhm.
percent. Like, there's differences, and those are interesting, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. And as far as that preparation, it takes a ton of preparation, but like how much I might go to a town that has an Airbnb in it, and it is simple enough to get an Airbnb, and it's a fishing town, and a lot of rich people like to go to this town and buy a fishing boat for the weekend and get a local guide, and that happens. I'll stay in one of those Airbnbs to do my work. Sometimes it'll just be, Freddie or something who I know. I call ahead. I just like call every number I can for this village, and somebody answers. I'm like, you got a couch I can crash on? Ideally, we talk to the school, and that's something that's great. But sometimes I do end up just staying in like a snow removal equipment. They have most of these airports, or all of these airports, have like a shed that has a grater in it so that we can remove the snow during the heavy winters and get these runways continuing, 365 coverage on this runway, or at least as many days as we can get. So I'll just stay in that unheated shed for as long as it needs to be to get the job done. And then in that case where we drove on a four-wheeler 2 hours outside of the town, I was staying in a Walmart tent for 3 weeks straight in the bottom of a rock pit. So it really depends. And I mean, I had to bring all of my food for a month in a big old box, all dry foods, ramen. I had so much ramen and spam. Yeah, not enough veggies. I did bring I did bring green beans, and I was out there with three other dudes, and of course these guys are equipment operators and laborers and stuff, so they didn't bring vegetables, and I did a lot of cooking for them. It's actually something that I enjoy, and you have that community within a community there. We have our field camping crew that needs their veggies, and they need their mother geologist over here to take care of them out in the field. But yeah, the preparation can be intense sometimes. We actually I want to talk a little bit more about that one just briefly. We actually won an award for that job, and this is me and a coworker of mine. He did the winter work. This is Flynn. A shout out, Flynn, if you're gonna check in on this podcast. I know you love your podcast, but we won an award for the project from hell to do this work, and it came with like a little golden shovel and a broken drilling bit, and we got our names like we get to go into the annals of the people who have survived a project from hell, beyond just a normal everyday maybe IT project or a report writing project or a now we're drilling out in 90-degree weather with our sweaters, or for in his case we are burning the engines out of snow machines because we're going so far and so fast, and the amount of popped tires and four-wheelers and the snow that freezes the water that you need for your drilling, all of that needs to be planned for, and all of that we need a mitigation or action plan when the risks occur. It's a whole thing. It's a whole process to do this work and to do the job.
Awesome.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you ever do any hunting out there, like living off land or anything like that, or is it always just bringing supplies with you?
Yeah, I do a lot of the bring the supplies with me. I know a lot of people like to fish, and I do fish
Mm.
here and there. I don't fish enough. We have some amazing fishing up here. My favorite's personally snag lining, where it's legal to do. I mean, I know that there's like dip net fishing. There's the going out for halibut out on like a charter or something. There's all kinds of fishing. I don't really hunt though. I know that
Mm.
my coworker Flynn, has gone out on a few hunts. I don't know if he bear. I mean, it's actually kind of another thing that's such a contrast between, um, New York and going to a store compared to Alaska. Have you had moose chili before or reindeer? Yeah,
No.
No.
it is like a whole nother world up here when it comes to that food, and that's something that I actually really enjoyed. Is I went to the northernmost Denny's back when it was still in Fairbanks, Alaska, and had reindeer sausage with my breakfast at the
Wow.
northernmost Denny's.
Wow.
of the U.S. And I got to check that one off the bucket list.
That's pretty cool, man. All right, I'm gonna switch gears here a
Hmm.
little on you, Ian, and
Yeah.
maybe tie in some fun facts about your background, about your history. We were doing some research about kind of your background, your family, and we came across, your dad, and it's just such a fascinating story that you're the child of a man that was able to run an entire marathon while juggling. So certainly, I guess, having, I think anybody that can run a marathon is already a hero in my book. Like that just requires intense sort of training and like focus on the long term, and like just grit, determination to even complete a marathon is a pretty meaningful feat. Doing a juggling, kind of wild. But I am really curious about what impact and influence he's had in your life. Obviously, you're a deep thinker. You wanted to come on a philosophy podcast and talk about life, but just wanted to get a little bit deeper into what impact he's had on you and how you've chosen to live your life.
It's a very complicated question to answer, and I think that a lot of people who have like complicated histories with their parents, might be able to. It resonates with you, right? If you have like, it's not necessarily that I'm like following in his footsteps or anything. In fact, there's so many things that I'm just like, I want to do the opposite of what you did. At the same time, I've ran the Maui Marathon twice as well. He did it while juggling. I just, did it for fun. Not that a
It's
marathon's
awesome.
necessarily fun, but and you might have come across something that I think that is really interesting from his history was he did the Jugglers for Peace, which he went to Nicaragua, and there's stories that he had of he's trying to move people from one town to another. The way that he described it was, he's effectively a circus clown. That was like his job. A law school dropout that went into doing circus work. So went from
Yeah.
one circus to the other. But he went there to take care of the kids as this caravan is moving from one place to another. Out of poverty and out of danger. And he had stories of like the van, like with flat tires, and like there might have been mines. And he wasn't sure. And there was like at one point an attack helicopter that just showed up out of nowhere. Like he has these
Yeah.
stories of this kind of crazy stuff happening, and it is as we look at like the world as it is right now, especially the United States. He's no longer with us. He did take his life actually from he suffered from alcohol, which I think is something that affects so many of us, right? And he couldn't handle the suffering anymore, so he did take his own life, having dealt with that for such a long time. It's if he was alive today and he was seeing what was happening a lot with the immigration stuff, I kind of wonder what he would be doing right now if he wouldn't be out there leading a caravan or not. At least for these kids. I mean, we're seeing kids now being detained as well. It's just, you know, it is something that you can take some good values, even if you don't agree with all of the values that somebody might have had, namely addiction or whatever it might be. And it does get into a whole world that I know that you all have talked about briefly too, of like the mortality of humans, right? We have kind of we have a certain sadness in being human. There is a certain sadness in being human that we all have to, I think, face. I mean, don't think I've talked about this yet on the podcast or in our conversations, but when I was in the army, the job that brought me up to Alaska was to work in mortuary affairs. And I mean, in being human, we deal with death. It's inevitable for all of us to deal with death. And that is, of all of the values I think that I take away, there's a certain morbid but peaceful morbid. You might say like morbid curiosity or something like that. There's a certain morbid peacefulness that I think that you can take away as the value of, or that's the value that I believe that I take away from him more than any other.
Yeah, I mean, look, humans are complicated, and I think the most, I don't know whether whatever your definition of success is, right?
Hmm.
Spiritual, financial, whatever, you have to have an extreme personality to be interesting.
Hmm.
I think people that do podcasts on philosophy in general are kind of boring. Like that's, we're not, we're not out there like in the limelight, like, people writing news articles and, people curious about what we do during the day. Like it's just not, right? But that's what is interesting to us and what gives us energy and what makes us happy in the time that we have on this earth. And I imagine that there's also, based off of your personality and your life experiences, there's a certain bias to action. And yeah, like your father, whatever he had to deal with to, to struggle addiction, there is always this other extreme of people that have, I think, personalities that they do something and they do it to the extreme. And I'm sure we can all recollect interactions or even friends that we've seen that have this innate, or not even innate, but this like, like asymmetrical ability to just do things at an extreme level. And you're just like run a marathon like that. I think that's extreme, but it's probably normal for you. Like you're like, my dad did, I can do it or whatever. But to me, that's like a really extreme activity because I I can barely run like I run a 5K and I'm like, okay, I did a 5K. Like how I can't imagine in my brain, my body being able to run that just because of that's my perspective. And so when you talk about like the time on earth and you talk about even the like limitations that we have, the thought of knowing that our time is finite can be empowering, but it can be paralyzing as well.
Mhm.
And I think we spend like, everybody individually balancing between both of those, right? And then there's times where like death hits you in the face and you're like, this is paralyzing. Like, what's the point? I should just like, you know, drink alcohol, smoke weed, do drugs, and like just escape and forget about being a contributor to society. And I think that's why community and having people around you is so critical and so important because it helps you to balance that. And, it's a compromise. I think no community exists without individuals compromising. I
Mhm.
think if you don't have the ability to compromise, I think you end up being an extreme person that maybe has, again, that like extreme success, whatever we decide to do it, because you're going to be a leader. I think leaders are lonely. I think being a CEO of a corporation is a lonely job. I think being president is a lonely job because you don't have anybody to validate your thoughts, to say, hey, should I do this? Should I do that? No, your job is to be decisive and not give a shit about what anybody thinks. And you just go because you're the leader. There's a certain responsibility that I feel community has to make sure that we put people in powerful positions that we want to be in powerful positions, not because we think it's going to ingratiate our own lives, but it's because it's going to build the right values within our society.
Mhm.
And we talked about that when you were talking about how, women, minorities within our community, like within some of the communities with smaller people, it takes work and effort to advocate for those that are less fortunate. And we used to do a really good job of that in America.
Mhm.
I felt like that was a big tenet of the progress that we've been able to make within our country. And I think we've somehow decided to shortcut the hard work that's necessary for us to have people that we want to elect into positions of power and authority. And I think to your point of like ranked choice voting and, being a two-party system, it's hard for me to believe we haven't reached a state in our democracy where the vast majority of people you interact with feel like we don't have any really good options in our political parties at the
Mhm.
moment. It's broken. And
Yep.
so there's hard work ahead of us of rebuilding that, of getting smart, intelligent, hardworking, determined, tried and true people that have seen things that say this is the right way we should all be living together and advocating for their local towns and communities, and then working our way back up into positions of power because those are people that we want guiding our country. And so I say all that to uh, say, whatever our parents have done before us, whatever our ancestors have done, our job on this podcast, I feel like, is to have these conversations of what do we think good is? What do we think bad is? What do we want to do more of? What do we want to do less of? And how do we foster dialogue amongst the different people we interact with in our world so that more people are doing more good? And that's really what I don't know. I kind of meandered all over the place there, gang, but hopefully that was helpful and interesting. And I'll leave it up to you, Ian, to kind of take my ramblings and take us to the next spot that you want to kind of enlighten us on things that you've seen in your travels.
I ramble all the time too, so I can't say much about that. I agree so much. And you know, the American values are liberty and justice for all. right? There's that keyword for all in there, and that's our community. That's everybody. I go to a Protestant church. I'm Christian, and it's love thy neighbor as thyself, and who is thy neighbor? It is everybody, right? The similar tenets in Judaism, in Hinduism, in Islam, and that's part of that 90 to 95% that I always bring up, right? Like those key things, that root, that rock that we build our values on, that's the things that we need to build our community on. Those things that look out for one another, that care for your neighbor, that look out for those minorities, women, immigrants, people who are often downtrodden or oppressed. Those are the things that, I think that we as a society and as communities, those are values that we need to build up more than anything else. I think that's what builds that diversity that is so strong in New York, and what makes strength there, and that's what makes strength just about everywhere. That's where I'm
Yeah.
getting at it all, and we've often forgotten a lot of the we often do focus too much on being the whole person from our history as well. I mean, I look at, my father, for instance, and I will absolutely not be addicted as often as I feel like I am addicted to pushing myself or as whatever it might be. But, I need to accept the good with the bad and focus on that good as something that I want to continue and try to cut that bad out. We as societies need to look at these white Christian nationalist movements and say, like, okay, there's certain values, I guess, in Christianity, but that white Christian nationalist part, like, maybe we need to cut that part out. We need to stop thinking about, the parts of the Bible that approved of slavery, or, we need to look at those things and say, I'm not going to accept that in today's community and society, and it's not relevant anymore. Those are those parts of our old society that we can move past and build into a greater, better, bigger, progressed future. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that that's how we get into that next. I think that that is how we as a society elevate ourselves from right now, where we are still in fighting against each other, and into that next level where there are things like the base in income, universal income, or the society that like looks out for itself, with healthcare as well. I mean, there's so many things that we have the values for, and we just need to enact, but we can't because we are taking the whole value, including the negative with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. And I think, like you said, you know, we're all kind of, sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought, but like, you know, our morality evolves, right? Like, and I think as a society, our morality evolves as well. Like, you have to
Mhm.
kind of pick and choose sometimes what you want to take from different philosophies, right? And I think maybe some of it becomes irrelevant at certain times. But I'm so glad you mentioned UBI, because we've been desperately trying to get Andrew Yang to come on this podcast, and no luck. So another shout out to Andrew Yang. Please come on the podcast.
Gonna get the yang gang.
We're trying get him to
That would be awesome.
talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He'd be an interesting character, especially this day and age, to talk about the future that I don't know, man. AI is just, it's a whole other topic. I know we didn't touch much on it, and we're getting towards the end here, but maybe the next time you're on, we can chat about the impact of AI. And I mean, holy cow, AI is everywhere here.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm sure it's impacting you in Alaska as well. It's like you can't get away from Chat GPT and our large
Can't.
language models and all that. It's kind of everywhere. Anyway, Chirag, any last closing questions here?
No, I think I'm good. Like you were saying, I think we're all trying to get to what a good life is, and it all starts with conversations like this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Until next time, that's a pod.